So, uh, this is going to be our first sort of recorded lecture, pre-recorded lecture. So today we're going to talk about these different agent causal theories of freedom that Timothy O'Connor discusses in chapter 15 of the Oxford Handbook. So last time we kind of recapped just basically libertarianism, what that is. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind what the view is, what the actual definition of that view is. And again, just a quick reminder, libertarianism is two sorts of views, two theses, two main claims. One is incompatibilism, right? So libertarians do not think that free will can exist if determinism is true. Determinism, the thesis that the past guarantees only one possible future. That's determinism. And if that's true, then there's this question, does free will still exist if there's only one possible future that can come from the past? Compatibilists think free will can exist. Incompatibilists think that free will cannot exist if determinism is true. And so libertarians are incompatibilists. They think determinism is a problem for free will. The other claim that they make that differentiates them from skeptics, so skeptics who think nobody's free and nobody's responsible, they are also incompatibilists. But so they agree, libertarians and skeptics agree that determinism is bad for free will, but skeptics also think indeterminism, undetermined actions, where there's multiple possible futures, they think that's a problem for free will also. But libertarians don't think that's a problem. They think determinism is a problem, but indeterminism, we can get around that. We can have free will in an undetermined world, in an indeterministic world. Right? So that's the libertarian incompatibilist, plus the idea that we are free. We are free because we can make sense of freedom in an indeterministic world. So this chapter kind of gives a couple motivations for why you might be a certain kind of libertarian. So remember, we had two kinds that we talked about, and they had to do with the way causation works. Event causal libertarians think that only events can cause things. So me, a person, an object, a certain kind of object, I'm a what you might call a substance. I'm not a process. I'm not an event. I'm a substance. I'm an object who participates in events. And event causal people think that substances don't cause things. Only events cause things. So it's not a rock that knocks the tree over. It's the event, the rock rolling down the hill and smashing into the tree. That whole process is what causes the other process, the tree, to fall over, right? And the same with people and their actions. It's like me having a certain belief and forming a certain intention and deliberating in a certain way. These sort of processes that occur right before my choice are what cause me to do what I do, not me in particular. It's the event that I'm caught up in that causes things. Agent causal people want to say that agents, substances, objects like people, they can cause things. They can cause events to happen. So we don't have to talk about like the event or the process that I performed of deliberating and thinking about things and then forming an intention and having certain beliefs and values, like this state of me being in these other kinds of mental attitudes and in the circumstances I'm in. We don't need to talk about all that for the agent causal libertarian. They think agents themselves can cause things with basically, this is kind of a characterization of it, but with like a special kind of power. And that difference is supposed to help with certain luck arguments. So some people think event causal people face this problem of luck, but event causal people can get around it by invoking this special agent causal power. So we'll see today a couple motivations for why you would be an agent causal person. And then Timothy O'Connor goes through some of the commitments that you have to accept if you want to be an agent causal libertarian. Um, what does this view bring with it? Sort of what's the baggage? What's the philosophical baggage you have to accept to be this kind of person, this kind of view? And then he addresses a number of objections. Okay, so We'll talk about some motivations, some ways in which, some things that the agent causal theorist has to kind of believe, and some different things that they might believe about what's going on with agent causation. How does it work? Excuse me. And then some objections. Okay, so the first motivation is ordinary causation. So not talking about agents causing things, but event causation has kind of been the default view. Most people, through kind of history of thinking about actions and causation, a lot of people have been event causationists. They like this view, and the reason is because it's just like ordinary causal systems. You don't have to talk about any special powers of objects. It's just like machines kind of going through, like things, objects kind of knock into each other. Just think of like a mechanistic kind of machine like picture of the world where there's just objects and they're purposeless. Right? They just kind of bang around molecules and atoms and objects like billiard balls and rocks and trees and people even. They just kind of bang around the world and knock into each other, and they follow the laws of nature. And if two rocks hit each other, then given their weight and their density and their composition, they might break apart. And we drop things and they fall. We cut ourselves and we bleed. Like these are all just mechanistic kind of processes that we don't need to invoke any intentions or anything like that. And so this is a really kind of clean way of explaining processes, how one process can give rise to another process, right? Why, when we pour salt in the water, why does the salt dissolve? Well, salt has a certain composition. It's made up of certain things. And when that comes into contact with water, which is also made up of certain things, namely like a chemical structure, right? Those things follow the laws of nature and they just bang into each other and they have certain reactions that they follow by law. And with mechanisms like a coffee machine and other even more complicated mechanisms, these processes just follow one after another and they just follow the laws of nature. And so this kind of way of looking at the world is this scientific sort of materialistic picture, and one way of trying to explain human actions is to just try to explain it in that way, just like how or other ordinary causal systems work. Maybe people just work the same way. A little bit more complicated, of course, because we have very complex brains, but ultimately, people wanted to try to explain human action by ordinary event causation. Okay. All right. So, but if you're trying to explain intentional, purposeful actions, then it's not so easy to do that with event causation. Okay. So here's one way of a famous way of trying to be an event, a causal theory of action. Say like, here's what the right kind of action is. Um, it's when, or sorry, here's what the difference is between an intentional action and a non-intentional action. Right? So people who were trying to explain intentional or purposeful actions, this guy Donald Davidson said, here, I have a theory. I have an idea about what the difference is. An intentional action, so someone, S, does some action A intentionally. The definition for that is when that person's reasons cause them to do that thing. So their intentions, their beliefs, their desires, their motivations. So when your action is appropriately caused by your motivations, by your reasons, that's when you perform an action intentionally, on purpose. Okay? Instead of like a tick. So like a doctor hits your knee with a little hammer thing, and your knee, the bottom half of your leg like flies up, right? That's not intentional. That's not a purposeful action. When someone just like even like throws their keys at you and you just instinctively like kind of duck your head and put your hand up to block it, that's not really an intentional action, right? That's just automatic, reflexive. What's the difference for when you, let's say, are in playing center field and the ball comes up in the air at you and you intentionally move yourself and then catch it, right? What's the difference? Well, Davidson says when your mental states, when the right kinds of mental states like intentions, beliefs, desires, when those things cause you in your body to move around and perform this action, that's when it's intentional. Okay, sounds kind of nice, like a pretty interesting view. Here's the problem. You get these things called deviant causal chains. Okay, so if it's true that an action is intentional just whenever the right kinds of beliefs and intentions cause it, then you get this possibility where you can have your intentions and beliefs and desires causing you to do something. Okay, S is the person's reasons cause that person to do that thing, but it's still not on purpose. So that's what we call a counterexample. So here's a definition, and someone says, oh, well, I'll give you a case where you get this side. You have somebody's reasons causing them to do something, but it's actually false that it's intentional. It's not intentional, which means this whole definition is wrong. Because this definition says anytime you have an intentional action, it's because someone's reasons cause them to do that thing. And the other way, anytime you have, that's if and only if, right? Anytime you have someone's reasons causing them to do the thing, the action that's associated with those reasons, then that means it's intentional. And so if you show an example where you get one side but not the other side, then that means the view is wrong. Okay, so here's the example. So imagine this person here is mountain climbing with this other person, and they're trying to pull them up and they're struggling, right? And so they do have some beliefs and desires about letting go. They're like, they don't want to let go. They also desire to hold on because they don't want the person to be injured or killed. But they're also struggling really hard, and maybe they're even in danger of falling, right? And so they think, uh, if I let go, then I'll get rid of this weight that I'm trying to hold, and I'll be okay. But they don't want to do that, obviously, even though they recognize, right, their belief about letting go and what that will do. That will relieve the tension. That will relieve the struggle they're feeling. And they do want to relieve the tension. They would rather relieve the tension by getting the person up to the top, right? But the point is, we can have conflicting desires. That's not weird. When we have conflicting desires all the time. Um, so you have these desires and these beliefs about letting go, even though ultimately you have stronger desires not to let go. But if you believe these things, you have certain desires and certain motivations for letting go, and just those things coming to your mind, just thinking about those things, causes you to be really nervous about letting go. You're like, oh gosh, no, I don't want to do that, but it causes you to get really nervous, and that nervousness causes you to let go. Okay, so now what does that mean? That means we have a causal chain where your motivations for doing something, letting go, your reasons, your beliefs, your desires, your reasons for letting go cause you through this other pathway. They cause you by causing you to get nervous, which then causes you to let go. So ultimately, these reasons cause you to let go, even though they took a little sidetrack here. And that means, look, if S does A intentionally, if and only if S's reasons cause him to do A. So it looks like S's reasons cause him, his reasons for letting go cause him to let go, and therefore he let go intentionally, according to Davidson. But that doesn't seem right. It's an accident. They caused him to let go only by making him nervous, and then that made him let go. So Davidson actually posed this objection to himself. So he had this view early on, and then came back later and was like, I don't think this works. So this is the problem. This is the problem of deviant causation, where if somebody says when your reasons cause you to do something, that means it's intentional, you can get these deviant causal chains, and that is a problem. So the point of that is some people rejected this causal theory because of this. The causal theory of action. What does it mean to perform an action intentionally? Well, it means that it was caused in the right way. Some people, because of this example here, this counterexample, they rejected that view. And some of them wanted to say, well, causation, intentional action is not about causation, right? They reject the causal theory, and they said intentional action is about the goal that you're performing. So what does it mean to do an action intentionally? Well, it means that you're trying to achieve some goal, something like that. But there's some problems with the teleological view. We won't talk about this in any real detail. Just to tell you, there's this causal view of what it means to act intentionally and on purpose. And the reason this matters for us is because intentional actions are required for free will. Free actions are going to be intentional and purposeful actions. So we want to be able to at least explain intentional and purposeful actions. Even if it doesn't explain free will yet, we need to at least explain that first. And that causal theory is supposed to do that runs into this problem. So now people wanted to say maybe the purpose of the action is explaining it, but other people tried to fix it. They tried to fix the causal theory, not get rid of it. They want to say, well, it's still about the action needs to be caused by your reasons in some way, but we need to kind of fix this stuff in the middle and try to block it. So they would try to give special conditions for how this stuff, the reasons, have to cause the action. They try to add stuff into the theory, basically, to block out these kinds of possibilities. Okay. So they try to give special conditions for the reason to action causal chain. This is reason to action. And this causal chain is bad because it means that you still get the causation happening, but it turns out that it makes the action accidental and not purposeful. So you want some conditions that block this stuff. But that's hard to do, basically. It's hard to come up with a bunch of really good sufficient conditions for when the reasons cause the action, and every time that means it's intentional. That's hard to do. So what people tried to do instead, and this is where the motivation for agent causation comes in, is they say, well, maybe it's not this event. So having a belief is kind of an event. So believing something, deliberating about something, desiring something, and then just having a belief, having a desire. That's like an event and a state. Those are different from agent causation. So an agent having a belief, instead of saying that's what caused the action, right? Having this belief, having this desire, deliberating about, instead of an event like this causing it, maybe just the agent causes it in a special way. And it's primitive, meaning that kind of causation from the agent is unanalyzable. We can't really explain it in more simple terms. It's like the concept yellow. Think about if you had to explain to someone what yellow was. Can you give a definition of yellow? Someone says, "What's yellow?" And well, you'd probably say, "Well, that's a color." But that's not the definition of yellow, because red is also a color. So being a color is not the definition of yellow, because there's non-yellow colors that are also colors. So what is the like, it's a kind of color, sure, that's the sort of thing that it is, but what's the definition? Some people think there just really isn't one. There's not a definition of yellow. It's just it's not famous, but it's one of these paradigm examples of a concept that you can't analyze any further. You can't give more simple concepts to explain it. You can like describe it a little bit and say it's a color that's typically bright, but then you can see that that's not always true. I mean, it's always true there's a color, but it's not always bright. It's very hard to give a definition of something like yellow. You just have to say, like, you just know it when you see it, you just and people wanted to say, when they invoked agent causation, one of the things that we'll talk about again lower down the handout is this kind of causation where an agent like this causes some action of letting go. They want to say it's kind of primitive. It's a simple sort of process that we can't really explain any further, and all we can really do is try to describe it a little bit. So we'll see how that works. But the motivation here, again, just a very quick review, is people needed to try to explain intentional actions. What makes an intentional or a purposeful action different from an accidental action or a reflexive action? And the famous theory for a long time was causation. It's a certain kind of event causation that explains the difference. It's when your reasons, having certain reasons, causes you to do that thing. That's when it's intentional. But then you get this like counterexample where you have your intentions causing your action, or your reasons causing your action, but it does so in a way that makes it accidental. So that's bad. So then the answer some people gave was, well, let's talk about agent causation. Maybe that's a way to get around it. So that's why some people are agent causation theorists, to try to give a better way of explaining intentional action and ultimately free will, right? Which is going to be intentional. All right, and now here's the second reason. So remember, libertarians are incompatibilists, which means determinism has to be false. Right? The world is not deterministic if you're a libertarian. They have to think the world is not deterministic. So there's open futures, right? There's open possibilities. The same circumstance, the one single circumstance, like right now, this moment right now, can actually allow for different possible futures, right? The future is not guaranteed based on the present moment. Libertarians have to think that, right? But indeterminism by itself, just the fact that there are multiple possible futures, and just the fact that the present moment causes the next future, so causation by itself and indeterminism by itself, those are not enough for free will. So not every intentional action, okay, is free. You might think intention, purpose, purposeful action, intentional action, that's required for free will, but it's not enough for free will. Think about dog and mammal, right? It's required it's required to be a mammal if you're going to be a dog, right? A dog has to be a mammal. So being a mammal is required for being a dog. But being a mammal is not enough to be a dog. Cats are mammals, rats are mammals, bears are mammals, right? So you have to be a mammal if you're going to be a dog, but that's not enough. And so the same thing, your action has to be intentional if it's going to be free, but that's not enough. So even if you had a good causal theory of intentional action, like here's what it means for an action to be intentional rather than accidental or reflexive or unconscious, right? That theory is not going to be enough for free will, because it's not just about performing intentional actions or purposeful actions. You need something more to make it a free action, because you can do habitual things without really thinking about them, and you can do those intentionally. Even people suffering from mental illnesses, like a psychopath or something like that, can step into an elevator and just kind of lose it for no reason, really, and intentionally kill you. We may still not blame them, because maybe they didn't have full control because they didn't know what they were doing, but they can still act intentionally. They have a goal, they have an intention to harm the person in the elevator with them. Maybe they're deluded, maybe they think you're like a secret agent or something, right? Maybe they're hallucinating, but they're still acting from an intention to do something, right? So the point is intentional actions are not enough for free, responsible action. And if that's true, then we need something else. And agent causation has been something people have tried to fill the gap to get from intentional action to free action. Okay. And indeterminism, so the absence of determinism, or the presence of different possibilities, the presence of indeterminism, is also not enough, right? Because remember, that introduces this luck worry. If right now, at this present moment, I'm able to do multiple things, right? What explains why I do one thing rather than the other thing? If I can do A and I can do B, why did I do A and not B? And if I do B, why did I do B and not A? What explains that? And if you try to say, well, your beliefs explain it, or your intention explains it, or the way that you are right now explains it, well, all of that stuff's going to be true in the possible world where I do A. So there's a worry that just the mere presence of alternative possibilities is not enough, because that's going to leave the possibility for luck, right? So we need something extra to secure control. Remember the extra factor strategy. We need something more than just indeterminism to get free will. We need something more than just our reasons causing our actions to get us free will. Okay, causation, when our actions are caused by our reasons, that's not enough. That's good. We want our actions to be influenced and caused by our reasons, but that's not enough for free will. And indeterminism, the libertarian says, is also good. We don't want determinism. We don't want the future to be guaranteed. Okay? But having multiple possibilities so that the future is not guaranteed, that's good, but it's not enough, because it still might be lucky which path you take. Gosh, sorry. So we need something more. So that's the second motivation. Okay, we need something more to get us to free will. Now, the O'Connor talks about these what he calls metaphysical commitments. Basically, what this means is metaphysics is about reality. It's the philosophy of reality. So, what is the nature of reality like? What is causation like? Um, what are properties of objects like? Are they dispositions or and like these questions about free will, about does God exist? These are like metaphysical questions about the nature of reality. All right, and gosh, I'm really sorry for my throat being kind of messed up. Okay, so the metaphysical commitments of the agent causal libertarian view is basically O'Connor saying what what does the agent causation theorist have to believe? It seems like they have to believe certain things if they're going to say that agents can be causes. Okay, they have to believe certain things. And what are those things? Well, he says agents have to be thought of as enduring substances. Okay, now substance again, just think about this as like an object, something that moves through time and is not spread across time. So maybe it'll help just to go down to this. So enduring, to endure means that you move through time. You are not spread over time like a process. So there's this word that philosophers have come up with for things, for entities that are spread over time like a process. Okay, so if a process like a baseball game, the playoffs are on right now, so I'm thinking baseball. So if a baseball game is not fully present at a single moment, right? So the Dodgers played the Giants last night. That baseball game did not exist. Not the whole baseball game. The baseball game in its entirety did not exist at a single time like this does, right? It did not exist at a single time. It's spread over time. It went from one time and continued, and a bunch of people were doing things, and objects, bats and balls and bases and so on were moving around. Some of them were not moving around, staying stationary. But there's a bunch of things that are part of this process, right? Maybe even you think the fans are part of the baseball game, maybe the stadium, maybe the lights. It doesn't matter what you think is a part of it. That's an interesting question. But the point is just what is this thing that we call the game, right? We know that there's players and bats and balls and bases, and those things are objects that are not spread across time. At any given time, you know, Justin Turner or Evan Longoria, these players are fully present at any moment, right? But the baseball game is spread over time. And so there's like the first inning and the second inning and the third inning, and that's only part of the whole game, right? So these are two different theories about how objects are related to time. Some are kind of not in time. I mean, they're in time, but some of them exist sort of independently of time. They kind of move through time. And other objects, not objects, but other entities that are usually thought of as processes or events, those don't move through time. Those occur over time. They're like spread over time. And so why is this distinction important? Well, O'Connor says agents have to be like this up here. Agents cannot be spread across time like this. So you can't think of people in this perduring way. This is called four-dimensionalism because people exist. There's like the three-dimensional existence at a single time, right? Think about this moment right now. There's three dimensions, right? Three-dimensional space. Now, if you add this moment to the next moment to the next moment and say your whole entire life, that sort of worm you might think of that's kind of spread across time from your birth to right now, that's a fourth dimension, the time dimension. And if you think you exist just in three-dimensional space and you move through the four dimension, that's up here. That's the enduring three-dimensionalist view of people. There are philosophers who think that you are not a kind of object like this that moves through time. They think, for reasons we do not have to get into, I'm happy to talk about them in the office hours if you want, but some people think you right now, you at this present moment right now, you're only a part of you. You don't fully exist at any given moment. You exist spread across time. That's you. You is you from the moment you're born, T0, to the moment that you end up dying. That whole thing is you, spread over time. And you get these little parts, what they call temporal parts, time-related parts. So at any moment, there's like a snapshot that looks like what we think of as a full regular person, but that's not really the full person. That's only a temporal part of the person, kind of like a baseball game. You can take a snapshot and just like take a picture, right, at a baseball game. You're like, oh, here's this moment in the first inning, but that's not the whole baseball game. That's a temporal part of the baseball game. And some people think persons, agents, people are like that. So at any moment, that's just a snapshot. That's just a piece of you. Other people think, no, at any given moment, you are fully existing. That's fully you. And at the next moment, you've just moved through time. And maybe you change a little, you grow. And so the baby you looks very different from the adult you. But as you move through time, you gain properties, you lose properties. Your description basically changes. And so, anyways, the point is, O'Connor says, if you want to be an agent causal theorist, an agent causal libertarian, this is the picture right here that you have to have. Okay. So four-dimensionalists with the worm, the four-dimensional worm spanning through time, that goes hand in hand with event causation. Why? Well, because you are not an agent at a time who can cause other things at the next moment. So if you have this picture, then this guy here can cause something at the next moment, like cause himself to move his arm or something like that. But this is not you. This is you on the four-dimensional picture. And so you can't really cause anything. So change is a process, and causing something is causing a change. But if you are a process, how can you cause a process like that is involved with you, right? Like you just are the process. You are a change on this view. Here, you are not a process. You cause processes and you cause change. So that's why if you're an agent causal person, O'Connor says you should not be a four-dimensionalist. You should not have this picture because it doesn't make any sense. If agents are going to be special individuals that cause things, this is the picture you have to have. Okay. So the three-dimensionalist or the endurantist, three-dimensionalist, you exist at specific times as you move through or persist through time. You move through time. You're not spread across time. And agent causation requires this picture because then that allows the agent to be active. Because you're not the same as some event, like you thinking, you having a certain belief, like as time, think of this as like a split second, as opposed to like 303, like the whole minute, like a split momentary second. And let's say this whole from T0 to T7 is like 1/100th of a millisecond, something really, really quick. But that's maybe the time it takes for you to think about something or to form a belief. Really, really fast, but we can split it up into these moments, right? That's not you on this picture. You are different from the events that you participate in. And you have to have this picture to say that. So again, this is just a metaphysical commitment. This is basically just saying, O'Connor says, if you want to be an agent causation theorist, there's two different views about what people are like. They're either objects or processes. You have to think that they're an object if you want to be an agent causation theorist. Okay, that's the point of that. Now, another commitment is you can't think that agents are just reducible, broken down into just their parts. So you are not just a machine. Essentially, you don't have to be you don't have to believe in anything supernatural or anything like that. That's not what he's saying. O'Connor is a theist, but he's not saying you have to be a theist and you have to believe in a soul or something like that. You can, if you want. That's one way to do it. But all he's saying is you can't think, if you're an agent causal theorist, if you think that there are agents that are real, powerful substances that can powerfully cause actions, you can't think that agents are just reducible to all of their parts, like their neurons and their cells interacting. You can't think that. Agent causal theory requires that we cannot reduce agents to just their physical parts. Okay, that's what he's claiming. All right, so the reason basically is that that would just turn it into event causation. We were trying to get away from event causation because of these things, right? And this is kind of helpful with event causation. But if you want to be an agent causal theorist who thinks there's these agents that are entities in their own right, they're different from events, and they cause events with a special power, then you can't think that people are just a bunch of cells interacting with each other. You can't think that, because that would just mean event causation is true, because it's just the event of one cell going through a process, causing another cell to go through another process, and then we can go even lower, right, to quarks and things. So if it's just things going through processes that cause other things to go through processes, that is not agent causal theory. That's just event causal theory. So in order to be an agent causal person, you have to think that agents, like people, are more than the sum of their parts. They can still be composed of parts. We're still composed of matter, cells, bones, neurons, all that kind of stuff. But we're not identical to our physical stuff. You can be composed of stuff without being identical to it. And the example that's always used is the statue versus the clay. So imagine a statue that's made of clay, right? It hasn't dried yet, let's say. You take a lump of clay, you form it into a statue, and now you have an object there, right? The statue. And let's just imagine that it hardens, right? So take the statue of David by Michelangelo. So takes this clay, forms it into the statue, hardens it and everything. The statue now exists, right? You have the statue of David that exists, and you can go see it. I can't remember where it is. I want to say the Louvre. I don't know if that's right. But so imagine that someone comes in with a sledgehammer and smashes that statue, like into pieces. Not just breaks the arm off or anything, smashes that statue into pieces. The clay still exists. All of the clay still exists. It's just in a pile of rubble. The statue no longer exists. Right? The statue was about having this certain form. The statue was kind of like a form that the clay took. And it, you might think, kind of created this new object that coexisted with the clay. But if the statue has different identity conditions than the clay, if the clay can survive while the statue goes out of existence, that means the statue and the clay are not identical. Okay, so, and then imagine a lump of clay, like a Play-Doh, and you form it into something, like here's a statue, or here's a symbol that I made, or I made like a toy truck or something out of the Play-Doh, and then you crumble it all back up into a ball. Well, the truck doesn't exist anymore, but the Play-Doh still exists. So they can't be identical. So the point of that is, even if you say an agent is something more than the cause of its, or sorry, something more than its parts, the agent is not identical to just all of the cells and neurons and things interacting. It's still composed of those, but it's not identical to them. And that makes sense because the statue and the clay, that's the same way that works. The statue's composed of the clay, but it's not identical to it. Okay, so that helps us to kind of separate the agent from the things that it's composed of. And also there's this idea of emergent properties. So what is the agent? You might think, okay, well, fine, if the agent's not the same as it's just the physical parts, cells and neurons moving around and interacting, what is the agent? And what's the agent power? Well, there's this idea of emergent properties. So when you get physical stuff, like quarks and cells and neurons and all these things, when you get them together in a really complicated way, once they go into a certain pattern, just by nature, just by their nature, they can make other properties. They can create other things to happen that are not just identical to those parts. So for instance, take water, right? A water molecule is, what is it? Two hydrogen molecules and an oxygen molecule. Atom, sorry. A water molecule is two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom, right? And that those atoms together, when those three atoms come together and they kind of meet and interact and stick together, they form bonds. That's a water molecule, right? And then if you get a bunch of water molecules together, you have like a portion of observable physical water, right? The molecules are not wet. A hydrogen atom, sorry, um, probably even a single water molecule is not wet, but a hydrogen atom is not wet. Hydrogen bonds with other chemicals too and doesn't make it wet. And an oxygen molecule is not wet. It's only when certain of those atoms get together, and then when they form molecules, and then when a bunch of those molecules get together, then you get this new property, wetness. So you got a bunch of water that's just all it's made up of is this. A bunch of water, it's just hydrogen and oxygen. It's tons of it, right? And they're interacting in special ways. But when that happens, you get this new property of being wet that we can feel and observe and feel the consequences of, right? So agent causal theory can kind of do the same thing. They say, look, the components, the physical parts of people, like neurons and cells and carbon and hydrogen, like all these little fundamental parts get together in a special way, then they create this new property of being an agent and having an agent power. So they invoke these kinds of things to help. But the main point is, O'Connor is saying, if you're an agent causal theorist, you can't say that the agent is reducible to their physical parts. The agent has to be more than just the sum of their parts. Okay? And the last thing that you have to say is that causation is real. Okay? If you're an agent causation theorist, you have to think causation is a real thing. And you might think, what do you mean? Who thinks causation is not real? Well, Humeans, David Hume was kind of influential, and there are still lots of Humeans today who think that causation is reducible. So we can explain causation with non-causal stuff. But O'Connor says the agent causation theorists cannot do this. You cannot reduce causation to non-causal stuff. So here's the way in which people have reduced it that way. So Hume says, and David Lewis, who's was a philosopher in the late 20th century, they said causation, like if you think of two billiard balls, like a cue ball hitting an 8 ball, what happens there? What's the causation? How do we explain that? Well, David Hume, and David Lewis said there's not really anything real when the cue ball connects with the 8 ball. There's not anything real that's going on in between those things. There's not like some power there that's like causing the 8 ball to move. What's happening is there's just a regularity. It's just that every time a cue ball moves in the way that it does and comes up and meets another pool ball, the other pool ball goes flying in a certain direction. That's it. It's just causation, causal laws, like Newton's laws even, and how causation works, how one thing causes another thing. The explanation for that is just that it's a regular pattern that we've observed in the world. That's it. There's no special power. It's not like the cue ball has like special powers that it activates when it hits another cue ball. It's nothing like that. It's nothing weird, nothing special. It's just we constantly see these connections, these regularities between objects. Right? So if I drop a pen without anything holding it, it will fall to the ground. How did it cause that? Like, what about the pen caused it to fall? What about my feet? Hume says nothing really is causing it. If by causation you mean what kind of powers were going on, he doesn't believe in any powers. He just thinks that's just the way the world works, is that when you drop something, it falls. That's a pattern that we recognize in the world. And we don't have to say anything about any causal special powers. Okay. And again, we're not going to get into the details of why you would believe this over this. We can if a little bit if you want in the office hours, but don't worry about the details there. The point is just some people try to reduce causation. They kind of try to get rid of causation and explain it in other ways. And O'Connor says if you want to be an agent causal theorist, you can't do that. You can't get rid of causation because you need causation to be real and powerful and this legitimate kind of genuine entity that's going to be able to get you this explanation where an agent can really cause stuff to happen, right? It's primitive. It's meaning you can't really explain it fully. You can only kind of talk around it, describe it. It's spontaneous, meaning it's not caused by something else. It's not determined by something else, right? It just kind of happens on its own power. And again, yeah, it's not caused. Yeah, spontaneous, like it just happens on its own. And also, it's not caused. And also, it's this powerful thing. It's this powerful relation that holds. Right? How do I cause my cup to knock over when I punch it? Well, it's this. What is the causation there? It's this relationship between me and the cup, and it's this powerful relationship where I do something, I exercise my power, and that eventually causes the cup to fall over. You might think, well, it causes my intention to form, and then that causes my hand to move. But we'll get to that in just a second. But the idea is that that's real. It's a real thing that's happening. I'm exercising a real power. Okay? And Humeans try to deny that. They try to explain what we see in the world as causal relationships in a different way without powers. Okay. So again, recap. O'Connor says, here's 3 things that you have to believe about the nature of reality if you're going to be an agent causal theorist. 1, agents endure. They are in this top picture. Agents endure. They move through time, and they're wholly present at every moment. Okay. Past you, that's not a part of you anymore. It's not like this whole thing is you. No, that was you. You were fully there in the past. And now you've moved through time and you're fully here. And you will move through time again and you'll be fully here. It's not like this, where you're the whole thing and these are just parts of you. You have to think agents endure through time. Okay. Second, agents are not reducible to their parts. They're not identical to just a bunch of cells and atoms moving around. That's not what an agent is. An agent is more than their parts. They're composed of physical stuff, but they're not identical to it. And they will have certain emergent properties that make them an agent that you can't just explain by going to the parts, right? You can't explain wetness by just saying, oh, well, it's hydrogen and oxygen atoms. Well, those aren't wet. We need to explain something about the intricate interaction between all the parts. Okay. And then finally, causation is real. We don't want to get rid of real, powerful causation if we're an agent causation theorist. Okay. We don't want to reduce it. Those are the things you have to believe if you're an agent causation theorist. Okay. So now O'Connor moves next to how agent causal theory works, how agent causation works. What is it like? How is agent causation different from event causation? What's it like? So he just talks about 3 things. Okay. What is the nature of causation? Agent causation. How is agent causation different from event causation? Well, he says basically agent causation, the agent causation view is a dispositionalist view. So for events, well, some people try to say agent causation is law-like. It's like a law where it's this relation holding between different types of things. So when you say something like, um, what is the law? I can't remember which one it is. Second law of motion. What the Newton's 3 laws of motion, where something continues to move unless it's acted on. Objects are in motion and they stay in motion unless they're acted on by something else, an external force, right? can't remember what that is, which law it is, but what does it mean for that to be a causal law of the world? Well, it means, what that means is it applies to objects of a certain type, right? It's not just a law about this rock or this arrow right here or this book or that book or this car or that car. It's a law about types of things. It's a law about objects, right? Not this object or that object. It's a law about objects and how they interact with each other, right? And so then other things like laws that govern, for instance, carbon molecules or certain kinds of genetic laws that cover how genes interact with each other. Um, anything, really anything, any physical entity, when there's a certain law, a physical law of nature, that explains how that thing works and interacts with other things, that law is about types of things. It's not about this gene or that gene. It's not about this water molecule or that water molecule. It's about the type water molecule, the category. It's about a category of things. And then those relations, those laws that describe how one type of thing interacts with another type of thing, those laws, those relations determine how the individual things, individual water molecules will interact with each other, or individual neurons will interact with each other. Okay? So the law-based view says the types of objects or types of events will cause other certain types of events. So if you get an event of type 1, that will cause an event of type 2. That's a law. Events of type 1 cause events of type 2. So wherever you see events of type 1, like dropping unsecured objects, then those objects will fall. That's a kind of law, right? And that law is describing what types of things will do. If you drop an object that is of the category, an object that's not suspended, that's a category. If you drop it, it will be an object that is falling, right? For agents, you might have things like laws that govern the way in which they act or whatever, but the law view is not the view that O'Connor likes. Causation is not a description about how different types of things interact for him. For him, it's a power. Causation is a power that kind of lives or resides within properties of objects. So my guitar playing ability is a power that resides in my other properties, like my hand-eye coordination and my memory and other properties of my brain and my sort of whole body, like my muscles and my bones. Those things have capacities, properties, strength, tension, coordination, communication with my brain through nerves. Like all these different properties kind of get together and they make this power, my guitar playing ability. And so that power, capacity, ability, these are kind of synonyms. It kind of lives or resides within other properties that I have, usually that are irreducibly dispositional. But dispositional meaning it's has the propensity to do something. So like fragility is a disposition. It means a vase that's fragile has the propensity or the tendency to break in certain situations. My guitar playing ability is a disposition. It means I have the tendency or the propensity, the capability to do certain things with a guitar in certain situations, right? I can play it if I try. That's what that means. And the agent causal power is just like that. It's this primitive, meaning unexplainable kind of power that resides in my properties as an agent. Okay. And these powers that I have, those are what explain the regularities we see. So the regularities, like agents don't cause things, agents don't perform actions except for reasons. That is explained. That law, if it is a law, is explained by the powers, not the other way around. Okay. So the powers are the most fundamental sorts of things for O'Connor. Okay. So then what happens when um, a rock rolling down a hill causes a tree to fall over? Well, for the dispositional view of agent causation, the power view, we reduce the events to powerful properties. So we can describe the causal relationship there of the rock falling down the hill and hitting a tree and knocking it over. We can describe all that in event terms, right? In terms of processes. Like, okay, the rock was falling, then the rock hit the tree, then the tree fell over. But the real stuff that's happening on this view, the dispositional view, is that there are powerful dispositions of those objects, of the rock, of the ground, of the tree, all the things that are not processes. And those powers interact with each other. And they cause the rock's powers cause the ground's powers to react, which cause more of the rock's powers to react, and that's what's explaining this kind of bouncing and rolling down the hill, right? The ground has the property of being like slanted, and when you put a rock's properties of being heavy and having a mass, you put that together with a piece of earth, the ground, that's slanted at an angle. That's a property of the earth. You put those properties together and you're going to get the rock rolling, right? That's just what those properties do together. An object that is flat and is slanted at an angle, like the ground, and an object that is kind of roughly circular, or at least enough to where it has mass and it's now has weight and it's on this slanted hill, that's just going to fall. And the explanation for that is not the law. The explanation for that, it's not laws about gravity and all that. The explanation, really, the most fundamental explanation, is the powers of the rock and the ground, the dirt, right? And then the same thing for the tree. Why does the rock knock the tree over? Well, the tree has certain properties, has a certain weight. Its roots are in the ground, and those have a certain tension, right? These are all just properties of these objects. And when the rock hits it with a certain speed, velocity, right, it has a certain power. It's it's force, right? It has a certain force because of its weight and its speed that it gained by interacting with the ground, the slanted ground. That is the fundamental explanation for causation. The powers of objects interacting. That's what the dispositionalist view is. That's O'Connor's view. And it's those powers and the way in which they interact with each other, O'Connor thinks, that explains the laws of nature, not the other way around. The laws are not more fundamental. It's the most fundamental thing about causation is not if this type of object is with this type of object. It's not that conditional statement. The most fundamental stuff is the power of the objects. And those powers are what make those law-like statements true. Okay. It's kind of a subtle point, but it's really important, this kind of direction. The powers make the law-like statements true because they're more fundamental. The law-like statements are not like a real fundamental part of reality. They're just true descriptions of the world. So the physical laws are true descriptions of the world. But what makes those descriptions true is the powers of the objects. Okay. And so how does it work? How does agent causation work? And how is it different from event causation? Well, O'Connor says it's different because it's the powers that are more fundamental, not descriptions about what happens between events. It's powers that make those descriptions true. So really, causation is about powers interacting with each other. And he's going to say for events, event causation gets reduced to powers of the objects involved in those events. Okay. And then for agents, it's just a special kind of power. Everything has powers, these powerful properties, and agent causation is just a special kind of powerful property that explains free will, explains free actions. Okay, and so the agent causation theorist also has to say, well, sorry, this is how agent causation works. So that's how O'Connor thinks agent causation is different from event causation. He thinks it's this dispositionalist view about these powers. But then he says, okay, what do agents cause with their power? Okay, exercising your agent causal power, it has some effect, but what is it? What does it cause? What does it produce? That's a question. So it might cause an entire action, right? That's one thing you could say. You could say, well, an agent exercises their power, and that causes this event, S doing A, an entire action, right? Or you could say it might cause some non-intentional, some like S doing A. That's a kind of complex intentional event action. You might say, well, S, some person exercising her agent causal power, causes some more rudimentary event, like causes a neuron to fire, right? That's a possibility. Or what O'Connor says is the best way to do it. When you answer this question, what do agents cause when they exercise their power? O'Connor says they cause a basic intentional mental action. Basic meaning there's not really other events or actions that are underneath it that explain it. So think about, like, if you're trying to explain um, what does it mean when I like wave at somebody? Well, that action of waving at someone can be broken down into like me lifting my arm and then me moving my arm from side to side, right? And those are all things that I do. And then of course even more complicated actions, like if I go deposit money in the bank. Of course, that's a ton of actions, right? Like I have to get up and move and drive and pull things out of my wallet and speak to the customer or the teller and all that stuff. Intentional actions, mental actions, like forming an intention, those are basic, right? There's not more basic actions that they can be explained in terms of. So that's what O'Connor thinks an agent causal power causes. So when you exercise your agent causal power, the thing that it produces, the thing that it causes, is you forming an intention to A, to do some action, right? So the formation of an intention is what agent causal powers produce. So I'm thinking about something, I have a bunch of beliefs. I believe that A is good and worth my time. I believe that B is good and worth my time. I want to do A, I want to do B. Lots of good reasons to do both. Maybe similar costs. Maybe I'm like 50-50, right? My agent causal power allows me to just simply form an intention to do something, which is essentially here, that's just what it is to decide to do something. I'm deliberating about whether to do A and B. I have good reasons for both. Couple costs for doing A, couple costs for doing B. It's a tough decision. I have to just decide, right? At some point, I have to just choose. And let's suppose I can't do nothing. And if you want, just make B doing nothing, right? A is doing something, B is doing nothing. And let's say there's really good reasons for both, 50-50, right? I just have to decide what to do. And the making of that decision, O'Connor says, if you're an agent causal theorist, the making of that decision is just it's you causing a basic mental action, causing your intention to be formed. That's just a basic act. There's no other further explanations for that. Of course, there'll be neurons firing and everything, but again, remember, just because the action, like forming an intention, is composed of other things, other processes like neurons firing and stuff, it doesn't mean that's what the action is. It doesn't mean it's identical to that. Like just that action, the intention just is neurons firing. It doesn't mean that. So O'Connor thinks forming an intention like this basic action, that's what an agent causal power causes or produces. Agent causing a basic mental act, like the intention to A, is just to decide. That's what it is to decide or to choose. Okay. All right. Now, this gets a little complicated here, but bear with me. So O'Connor here wants to explain what the role of reasons is. Right? What role do reasons play in agent causal theory in performing free actions? We want to say that agents perform actions for a reason. If you do something freely, there must be some explanation for why you did it, right? That's what's special about agents. We can act for reasons. Dogs don't act for reasons, at least not in any sort of important way that's relevant to human freedom, right? You might be able to say, okay, well, the dog smells something that it really likes, and that causes it to go sniff around and eat the food or whatever. And okay, that sounds like, well, the reason it ate the food because it smelled good or whatever, but it's very, very different. Hopefully that's kind of obvious. It's very different. It's more like a desire, a sort of unintentional desire. Dogs just like certain smells the same way we just like certain paintings and tastes and smells and so on. There's a kind of primitive sort of thing going on here. Um, the dog has a desire and it causes him to go sniff around and eat the food, right? That's very different from I want to have, a secure future, and I want to be able to do things that I enjoy, and so I'm going to pursue this career of teaching, right? That's acting for a reason in a very different way than just having a kind of base desire that causes my body to go move. It's very different, right? So agents act for reasons, and now we need to find a role for reasons. How do reasons play a role? Because it seems like our reasons influence us. Okay? It seems like they influence us. So reasons are these non-causal explanations. They influence us. Certain reasons make it more likely that we're going to do something, and other reasons will make it more likely that we're going to do something else. So our reasons conflict, our motivations conflict, right? But they make sense of what we do. They explain, well, why did that person do that? Well, they had certain reasons that it motivated them, and we can explain all that stuff, right? So they add to the causal explanations. Our neurons, our properties, those things are what are causing us to um, take in information and then deliberate with our capacities for reasoning. Our properties do those things, cause us to think and deliberate and act and all that. But when we ask, why did we do A? A lot of times we want more than just what caused us to do A. Think about accidentally bumping into someone. Why did you do A? Well, okay, we can give a lot of causal explanations for why you did that. Maybe you tripped, maybe you were distracted, maybe somebody pushed you. But there's no reason explanation. You didn't do it for a reason. It was an accident. And because there's no reason explanation, that's why you're not free. You didn't do it freely. You're not responsible. The person shouldn't blame you. It was an accident because you didn't do it for a reason, right? So even though we can give causal explanations of our actions, if there's no reason for it, that's a lot of times at least going to take away freedom and responsibility. So reasons do play an important role, even though it's not clear that they really cause us to do anything. Okay. And so when we do something free and intentional, it's not just true that we cause an intention to do A. It is true, right? That's what O'Connor just said. What does an agent power cause? Well, it causes us to form an intention. But even though, it's us causing our intention to be formed. But even though we cause an intention to do A, we also cause an intention to do A for a certain reason, right? So this is adding a little bit more to this. The agent causal power, S exercising her agent causal power. What does that cause? What causes S's intention to A, to do some action, to be formed? But more than that, especially if it's a free action, there's going to be some reasons involved. S is going to do A for certain reasons, whether that's just because they want to, just because they feel like it, just because it seems nice. That's totally fine. That's a reason, right? It doesn't have to be all fancy, sophisticated reasons. It's just you do things for reasons, and that might just be because you feel like it. But the point is, there is this extra stuff here. We form intentions to do things for reasons. Okay. So now the question is, what's the role, right? Reasons influence our actions, but do they cause us? So what this says is reasons can't just influence our actions non-causally, right? They can't just influence us without causing us, it seems. Why? Well, because reason seems to they seem to strengthen our motivations, weaken our motivations. So if you all of a sudden recognize a certain reason to do something or to not do something, right? You're thinking about, let's say, somebody's thinking about using drugs. They're an addict. Let's say there's an addict. They're thinking about using drugs, and they are just not thinking about this, about their family or something um, to begin with. But all of a sudden, their family comes to mind. Maybe their mom or their husband or their kids or whatever. Uh, and because they think of that reason, how much their family will be hurt, the risk that they're causing to their family, then they think now they're strongly motivated to not use drugs, right? The point is, reasons, thinking of reasons, changes our motivation. And that sounds causal, right? That sounds causal. So, what role do reasons play? Well, they certainly influence our actions. They explain our actions in certain ways. And now it seems like maybe they cause our actions. Right. So it seems like we need a story about how reasons to do something link up with you're actually doing it. How do the reasons for doing A explain why S does A? Okay, on the agent causal power view. So Randy Clark has this idea. He says, well, an agent causes one of many possible reason to action links to exist. Okay, so I'll just go here. There's links between, so suppose this is a reason for doing A, right? Like that it will hurt your spouse's feelings and risk ruining your relationship. Okay, this might be a set of reasons to do A, which maybe is abstain from to not do drugs. So it gives this reason to do it, and it makes it like really likely that it gives you the strong motivation to do this thing. But then there's other reasons that, say B is using drugs. There's other reasons. It feels good. You don't want to disappoint your friends, maybe peer pressure, whatever. And these strengths might be different. There might be a whole bunch of reasons in here for a bunch of different actions. We're keeping it simple by saying you can only do one or two things. But it could be a bunch of things, right? You could have 20 options in front of you, each with their own set of reasons, right? The point is, Clark says, well, how do the reasons play a role? Well, the reasons kind of set up these motivations, right? And the agent causes one of them to be in existence. So the agent causes this link here to be actual. He says, an agent causes one of the many possible reasons to action links to exist. But, right, and links are stronger and weaker. Some reasons sort of motivate us more than other ones. So you're more motivated to abstain for these reasons than you are motivated to use for these reasons. The problem is, if you want to be an agent causal theorist, this stuff over here cannot cause you to pick A or B. So these motivations, the strengths here, the fact that these reasons push you towards A, like with 80% strength, and the fact that these reasons push you towards B with 20% strength, they don't actually push you. They can't. Because remember, the causal power is uncaused, it's spontaneous, right? It's primitive. It can't be explained by some other thing causing you. So Clark thought, oh, maybe the agent just like makes one of these real, makes one of these actual. And so when S is thinking about whether to do A for these reasons and is thinking about whether to do B for these reasons, what happens when he just does A? Well, he just chooses A for these reasons. He makes this real. Okay, that's what Clark is trying to say. These don't cause him, which is a good thing. Like, these don't actually have any causal effect on his decision. And that's a good thing because we don't want the agent power to be caused by anything. It's supposed to be this special spontaneous power that just the agent can exercise however he wants. Okay, so this no effect here is initially, it's kind of a good thing, right? We want the agent causal power to be independent of these other kinds of influences in a certain sense, causally independent. But that's just exactly the problem. The strength of these links, so the fact that these reasons motivate you to do A with a strength of 80%, and the fact that these reasons motivate you to do B with a strength of 20%, that can't have any effect on what you actually choose, and that seems like a problem. It's good at first because we want the agent causal power to be independent, but it ends up being a problem because now how do the reasons have any role, right? You can say like, oh, these reasons are really motivating for S to do A, and these reasons they're motivating but not quite as motivating for S to do B, and then S chooses A, right? Like, well, you might think, oh, it's because it was really motivating. Well, no. The actual motivations here, how much the reasons motivate someone to do something, doesn't actually have any causal effect on what they choose. So now there's like the question of what the role of reasons is comes up again. He was trying to give a role for reasons, like, oh, they like influence you in a certain way, right? Some reasons make it more motivating. You might have other reasons here that make it less motivating to do A. But what role do they play? Well, on the agent causal view, it's not clear what role they play because the agent just chooses one. He chooses it for certain reasons. Sure, it's still true that he does A for these reasons, but this 80% stuff here, like how much the reasons motivate him, is not supposed to really make a difference to which one he chooses. Okay, so let me skip 2.0, Clark 2.0. So how do we solve this problem? O'Connor tries to give a picture that's similar, but with a little bit of some things fixed around so that it can work. So that reasons actually have a role, and the agent is still the one doing the causal work. Okay. Very sorry for my kind of getting a little under the weather, I think. All right, so O'Connor, the agent's cause. This is what he says. This is what he says about the role of reasons. What role do reasons play? The agent power is structured by the reasons. Not just the reasons, by other things, but it's structured. It like has this power, and the reasons that you recognize and other things about you, your character traits, those are going to influence like how reasons affect you, your capacities, right? Like what you're able to do. I mean, just like how you can move around in the world, how the kind, like what languages do you know, like what kinds of abilities do you have, what skills do you have, all of your capacities, mental capacities, physical capacities, your character traits, and then all the reasons that you recognize in a certain situation. Basically, think of this as like all the information that you have about the actions that are possible for you. Right? Those things structure. That's kind of O'Connor's word. They structure your power to be inclined. They structure your power to be inclined. So the agent power has tendencies. It's inclined. Your power is actually, so it's not just the reasons that like motivate or point towards a certain action to some degree. It's now they influence your power so that your power is now kind of pointed to certain degrees. It makes certain things possible for you to different degrees. I probably should have put some degrees here, but the idea is these kinds of things structure your power to certain degrees, right? The influences structure your power, and that power, because of how it's structured by your reasons, causally structured, right? So now you have causal interaction here that inclines you towards certain actions to certain degrees. I didn't write the degrees here, but okay. Why is that different from this? Well, these don't have any effect on you. On Clark's view, he didn't say anything about the reasons sort of actually causally affecting your power. O'Connor says that's the way we need to fix this, right? So the tendencies of your power, what you're sort of inclined or motivated to do, is structured by the reasons you have, by your character, by your capacities, and the actual where this ends up, right? The kinds of motivations you end up with right before you choose, they're determined by. They're a factor of your reasons and your character and all that. And so your felt motivation corresponds to how your power is structured. So if your reasons, all your reasons, your character, your capacities sort of make it way more likely that you're going to be inclined to do A, right? It's still possible that you could do B. You still have some motivation to do B, right? And you're not determined, so it's an open possibility for you. But let's say for this case, you have really strong motivation to do A. You're going to feel that motivation. If your power is actually structured so that you're really inclined to do A, that's going to correspond to this felt motivation to do A. Okay. But in the end, this is where it stays the same. It stays the same with Clark's view. In the end, the agent causes the action. The agent causes what they do with their power, not this stuff. Not this stuff. And the probabilities, the inclinations that your power has, don't determine what you'll do. You could do B a million times in a row, even if you had your power was like really strongly structured to do A, you're really strongly motivated to do A, you could do B every time. That's possible. Because the probabilities, the inclinations that you get from your reasons and capacities and all that, they're not really doing the ultimate work. You, the agent, through your power, of course, which is structured by the reasons, but it's you who decides which motivation you're going to go with. Now, it might be really hard for you to choose B because you're really, really strongly motivated to do A, but ultimately, if we're on the agent causal picture, you have a primitive, sort of unexplainable power to just choose B if that's an option for you. Okay, so again, quick recap. What is agent causal power? What is this thing? Well, it's a kind of dispositional view about powers, these primitive powers residing in the properties of agents. Okay, and those powers explain the laws that we see, because powers kind of have the blueprint of the world written into them, you might think. But it's these powerful properties belonging to an agent, and it's when an agent exercises those powers that they cause certain things to happen. Well, what do they cause? O'Connor says they cause not the whole action, like the whole overt outward action, not just little simple neural events. They cause intention formations. When you exercise your power, what you do is you form an intention, a basic mental intentional act. Okay? You just decide to do something. You choose to do something. That's what you cause. A decision, a choice, an intention formation. Well, what role do reasons play? O'Connor says the reasons, along with some other things like your abilities and stuff, structure your power. They structure your agent causal power, which means your agent causal power has to be sensitive to reasons, has to be sensitive to the rest of your body the way you are. If you're very, very tired, maybe it'll be even harder to exercise your power in accordance with your reasons. Things like that. This model kind of makes sense of stuff like that, which is good. But the role of reasons is they structure your power so that you're motivated more or less degrees to do certain things. But that doesn't determine what you'll do. It's not like you always just go with your strongest motivation. The agent still exercises their power in accordance with their reasons, or I should say, in light of their reasons, to form an intention to do one thing or the other. Okay. That's the powerful causal picture. Now, we'll look at some objections here. And I think I'm just going to push through and get through all this, even if it's a little bit over an hour and a half, because I know we kind of backed up last week a little bit, and we kind of lost a day trying to restructuring the class. So I'll just, since it's recorded, I mean, I'll just push through and put this up so that I can do the other one for Wednesday. But we'll go through these objections, and the idea for your paper, if you write on this chapter, don't write on the Kane chapter. Write on this chapter or the next one we're reading. I think what you should think about for your paper is trying to respond to either one of these objections. Basically, here's what I think you should do. You should explain these conversations. Pick one of these conversations between the agent causal theorist and one of their objectors. So each of these is going to be somebody posing a problem for agent causation, right? You'll have to do a little bit of explaining. You will not have to include all of this stuff, but try to summarize this idea of agent causation. Say, like, here's the view. Here's what agent causal libertarianism is. Now, here's a problem. So pick one of these problems. The bolded are problems, right? There's two sets. Objections about agent causation being incoherent, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. And then there's another set of objections. These objections down here don't say that it's incoherent, like logically impossible. It just says even if it's coherent, it still doesn't solve the problem. And there's 3 of those, I think. Yeah. So what you should do is briefly explain agent causal libertarianism, pick one of these objections, and then say, here's the problem, here's what the objection is, here's some things that the agent causal person can say in response. So that's the kind of the structure the whole way down. O'Connor says, here's a problem, and then O'Connor says, here's a way to respond. And then he even here he says, well, here's a way in which the objector might respond to my response. And then here's my response to that response to my response. So you can explain some of these conversations between O'Connor and the objector, and then your evaluation would be, who is the winner? Who do you think wins and why? I think that will be an easier way to write the paper. Rather than trying to come up with your own objection, it will be more of like, show me your understanding of this chapter. Not the whole chapter, again, even, right? Just show me your understanding of the basic understanding of agent causation, agent causal libertarianism, right? And then your basic understanding of one of the objections and how someone would respond to it. Someone who's trying to reject agent causal theory and someone who's trying to defend it against that objection. Just being able to explain all that and understand all that is tough. So that should be kind of your paper, and then save some room at the end to say who you think wins and why. Okay. All right. So what are the objections? So these first 4 objections, they try to say that agent causal libertarianism is incoherent, logically incoherent. So it's like trying to say that there are round squares. Okay, that's what ultimately these objections are going to try to say. That you have to, in order to be an agent causal theorist, you have to have like a logically inconsistent view. That's what all of these objections, these first 4 objections, are going to say. And the first one goes like this. C.D. Broad says, who's an old philosopher, actions are datable. They're directly in time. Just like we saw above here. Actions are in time in a not like moving through time, but they are like are a part of time. You know, they're spread on over time. That's an action. Processes, actions are time. So forget about people in here, but like a baseball game, right? Like actions, events, those things are directly in time. They unfold over time. But agents don't. Well, what's the problem with that? agents can't cause something if they're related to it differently in time. So the things that they cause are supposed to be actions, events, right? Even O'Connor says that. They're supposed to cause these basic mental actions, forming an intention, which is a process, right? But processes are directly in time. They're datable. The process happens at a certain time. Agents aren't like that. Now think of the opposite. Events are not directly in space, right? The baseball game is not directly in space. Like, where is the baseball game? Well, it's the location of the baseball game is not direct. It's not like the baseball game itself has a direct location. It's only located where all of its objects that participate in it are located. So processes are indirectly located. They're located in virtue of the things that participate in them being located in space. Right? So where's the baseball game? Wherever all of the players and bats and things that belong to it, that's where it is. Now the opposite is true for agents. Events are directly in time. They occur at and over certain times. But agents are only indirectly in time. They're in time only in virtue of the events that they participate in. So when does an agent occur? That sounds like a weird question, right? Well, you might think like, well, at all times. Well, it occurs. What specific time does it occur? When is an agent? Like, it almost doesn't even make sense to ask that. An agent occurs whenever the event it participates in occurs. You are always participating in events. Sleeping, talking, standing, sitting, moving. Even not really doing anything is an event. What we call a stasis. Think of like two books leaning up against each other that would otherwise fall. That's an event of each book, the books holding each other up. That's an event, even though it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Like sleeping is a good thing. Like, of course, like neural things are happening or whatever, but you're always participating in events. And so when you occur is just whenever the events occur, because the events are the things that are directly in time. Okay. Why is this a problem? Well, if an effect is in time, it seems like the cause also has to be in time. That's the objection. So C.D. Broad says, on agent causation, agents end up being very different from actions, events, right? Obviously, that's what O'Connor said above. Agents are not events. You have to think that agents are substantive that move through time. They're not a part of time. They don't occur over time. They move through it. Well, if agents and events are very different like that, then how can an agent who's not directly in time cause an event which is directly in time? So since agents and events are so differently related to time, how could one cause the other when causation seems like it's something that happens in time? Okay, that's the worry. And the worry is not like, oh, this view is like empirically false. No, the worry is that like this doesn't make any sense. It's incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. You can't get the concepts to work together. Okay, how could someone respond to that? Well, Connor says this objection, the problem with this objection is that it's not really motivated. It's not really clear what this objection is actually saying. Okay, so the objection says like, oh, look, events are not directly in space. Events are only located in virtue of their participants being located. A baseball game is only located somewhere indirectly in virtue of its baseball players and objects being located in places. And then the opposite, right, for agents. Agents aren't really in time. They don't occur at a time except for when they participate in events that occur at a time. And O'Connor says, I don't know what you mean. So why should we think that baseball games aren't located? Why should we think that only the players are located and it's the baseball game that's like indirectly located? Why? What's the motivation for that? Why should we think that means agents aren't, why should we think that means events aren't really located? And the same for this. why should we think agents aren't really in time, occurring at certain moments, directly in time? Why should we think agents are only directly in time in virtue of their why should we think agents are only indirectly in time in virtue of the events that they participate in? It's just unmotivated. That's O'Connor says Broad doesn't. He just thinks Broad thinks that these are intuitive. He thinks like, well, I'll just say these things and people will kind of understand what I'm saying. And O'Connor says, well, you need to say more because all you've shown is that they kind of depend on each other. But it doesn't show which one is more fundamental. It doesn't show that baseball games aren't really located and baseball players are. It just shows that baseball players sort of help baseball games get located. But that doesn't necessarily mean they aren't located or they aren't really located. And the same thing with time. Agents occur in time because they participate in events that occur in time, but that doesn't mean that agents don't occur. They do occur. They occur with help from the events that they participate in. But the point is, O'Connor thinks that this objection is presently not very well motivated. It's resting on these intuitions about these things being very different. Events seem like they're in time and not space. Agents seem like they're in space but not really in time. But why should we think one is more fundamental than the other? Sure, they depend on each other in certain ways, but we can't make sense of the idea that agents are, quote, only indirectly in time. Remember, that's supposed to cause the problem. Actions are directly in time, agents are not, and that's bad because if an effect is in time, like an event, then the cause must also be in time. Like, well, what do you mean agents are only indirectly in time and not really directly in time? He says, you haven't really motivated that view. You've done this nice trick here by saying, look, where is a baseball game? Well, it's only where the players are. When is a person? What a weird question, right? Like, well, when a person is only when the events they participate in are. And O'Connor's like, that's very cute that you are able to speak that way, but I don't really know what you mean by agents are only indirectly in time. So that this response here is basically saying you need to do more work motivating why this stuff actually leads to this stuff. Agents can't cause actions. Yeah, they're related to time differently, but I don't see yet how that shows that they can't cause events. That's what O'Connor is saying. Okay. The next objection, causation is uniform, meaning causation doesn't come in different types. Causation is just causation. And when we say things like, well, this caused the other thing in a different way, like I can cause you to do your homework by requiring it, or I can cause you to do it by telling you how much it will help you, or I can cause you by like forcing you, right? Like someone could hold you down and like make your hand move with a pen and force you. Though it seems like, oh, well, those are different kinds of causes, right? Like a chemical cause or um, a biological cause or a psychological cause. But really, these are just different kind of forms of the same thing. Causation is one kind of thing. This is Randy Clark, who's actually an agent causal theorist. So he's raising worries for his own view because he's trying to answer them. He's like, look, people might worry about agent causation because it seems like agent causation implies that there's a different special kind of causation that's different than other causations. And a lot of people want to think that causation is uniform. It's only one kind of thing. Right? So the problem is agent causation works so differently from event causation that it looks like there's two types of causation. And a lot of philosophers, metaphysicians, they don't like this. Basically because of Occam's razor. Don't add more stuff into the world if you don't need it. This is an old kind of common objection to God existing. Some people would say invoking God kind of violates Occam's razor. It's just an appeal to, you're bringing another kind of entity in the world that now needs to be explained. And maybe we can explain all the other things that we wanted to explain without God. That's the idea. And so, same here. You're introducing a whole nother different kind of causation in order to explain actions, free actions or whatever. And the thought is, don't do that unless you really need to do that. And the having two kinds of causation is a big cost. So you better really, really need agent causation. So why are they different? Well, event causation is like causal properties of objects. Um, so think like chemical reactions, billiard balls, like these things have different properties. They have weights and chemical properties, and they participate in different kinds of events that will produce other kinds of events, right? But all the properties involved, their weights, their extensions, their masses, their capacities, those all work together to produce some effect, right? That's just think of a chemical reaction happening. Just all the properties of the water and the salt and the hydrogen, whatever else, and those things undergoing processes produce some other processes, right? They have properties and they fire dispositions and they fire, but that's different than agent causation because an agent causal power isn't really disposed to produce effects, not in the same way. So it's not like just the property of fragility where that's there and it's disposed to break in certain situations, right? An agent causal power gives the agent a power. It's a power to have a power, kind of. The agent causal power it gives the agent a capacity to produce effects, right? The power doesn't produce the effect. The agent produces the effect through their power, by exercising their power. But the agent causal power, it's supposed to be a power of the agent to do stuff. Remember, the agent and their power cannot be reduced to their parts moving around. Like chemical reactions. Chemical reactions, the way we explain why one chemical gets together with another chemical and produces some other effect, like smoke or poisonous gas or whatever, the way we explain that is just by all the parts. All the minuscule little parts and their properties. Same with billiard balls. Same with any sort of mechanistic thing. That's not the way we do it with agents. We can't just reduce it to the parts of the agent causing other things. It's the agent themselves. It's more than the sum of their parts that gets this capacity from their power. Their power gives the agent the capacity to do things. It would be like the hydrogen or the water molecule getting some special capacity from all of its parts. And not the hydrogen and the oxygen interacting, but the water molecule itself, after it's bonded, the atoms have bonded, has this special power that the hydrogen and the oxygen don't. That's not the way this gets explained on event causation, but it is the way agents get explained. The agent power is mysterious. It really is mysterious, right? It's influenced by all this stuff, and it has certain tendencies, but the power itself is not doing this stuff here. It's the power that gets structured, and the agent with their power, in conjunction with their power, causes them to do something. Right? It's this like mysterious influence that doesn't determine it, right? The power is independent of the probabilities. The agent is independent of the probabilities of its power, right? It seems to fire randomly. So these two kinds of causation are very, very different. And so the worry is, I thought causation was supposed to be uniform, and now the agent causation person is trying to say that there's two completely different types of causation. That's a violation of Occam's razor. Causation is uniform, not multiform, or right. So that's bad. That's a problem. So what does the agent causation theorist say? What does O'Connor say? It says, look, the causation, a couple things, right? You could say a couple things. Agent causation as this distinct power is just not really that mysterious. That's kind of the main response. It's like, look, you think it's very mysterious, and it does seem kind of mysterious how all this stuff can incline you, can motivate you to different degrees, but the degree to which you're motivated doesn't really determine what you do. You could be really strongly 80%, right, motivated to do A, and 20% motivated to do B, and you could just always do B. Every time we roll back the universe, you could do B as many times as you want, because it's not the probabilities that do the work on agent causal view. It's you. So you might think, well, what the hell does it mean for you to be influenced by the reasons if they don't really matter to what you choose? That's a very good question, and we'll come to that in just a second. But the idea is, you think this is mysterious, that the agent causal power works differently like this, kind of seems to fire randomly, but it's not, because the world is a lot weirder than you think it is. Look at radioactive decay. So certain radioactive particles have a kind of half-life. They'll start decaying, but a lot of the times this is just random when it happens. Has like a kind of a certain window, and there's even radioactive sort of, I guess, particles or elements or whatever, that when you do things to them, like heat them up, that will make their decay quicker. They will decay quicker. It will make them more likely to decay quicker, I should say. But it doesn't determine that. It's not like you can heat it to a certain degree and then you'll know when the decay will start and finish. No, it will make it so that it's more likely to decay quicker, but still undetermined. Right? Radioactive particles will just simply start decaying when they decay, and the circumstances that they're embedded in don't really affect that. They don't affect when they actually start decaying. They do this stuff, right? Because over time, um, if you look at the way radioactive particles behave, and especially in different kinds of environments, you'll see these tendencies, but you can't really get a law. I mean, you can't measure all that and get a law where it's like, okay, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. That's just not how radioactive particles work. They're basically one of these things in nature that agent causation theorists really like, because they're kind of just random, undetermined by their environment, by their situation. So that's just a thing. That's just a thing in the world that physics has discovered. And so O'Connor's like, look, yeah, you can call that mysterious if you want, but the world, causation, is pretty freaking mysterious. Look at radioactive particles. We just can't really measure when they're going to decay. We can get like windows, but even those can be off. And so why would we think that agent causation, being kind of influenced by reasons and stuff, but still somewhat random, what the agent does, why should we think that that's so weird? Right? And mental and physical properties, some people think, are very, very different. Some people think mental properties, like what we talked above, cannot be reduced to just brain states. Mental properties are categorically different than the physical stuff that they rest on. So, of course, you need brains and neurons and physical stuff in order to get beliefs and desires and so on. But mental states, mental properties, some people think are just categorically different from physical properties. There's two kinds of things, and maybe you've heard of this, it's called dualism. There's not just material physical stuff. There's mental stuff too that's different. It's of a different kind. Okay. And some people think that, like, okay, well, why not two types of causation if there's two fundamental types of properties in the world, physical and mental? Why not two types of causation? So the idea here is, again, is like, you're basically, this objection says, wow, causation is going to be really weird if agent causal view is right. I thought causation was uniform, but agent causation says there's different kinds of causation, and a kind of weird one that they're adding at that, because it's random and all that. And the response is, sure, I mean, it sounds kind of weird at first, but let's look at the world and see what the world is like. Radioactive decay is super weird. It just kind of randomly fires. And we can do things to change the window for when it fires, so it is responsive in a way to the environment, but not ultimately determined by it, because it will just start decaying randomly. Okay, mental and physical properties are weird. A lot of people will think, how are you going to explain mental stuff with just the physical? It's a very hard thing to do. And so why think that causation is just kind of physical event causation? Why not think that there's this different agent special causation? And also, O'Connor's view is there just isn't any event causation. All causation is agent causation. That's O'Connor's main response here. Like, so causation is uniform, but agent causation implies it's not uniform, that there's two kinds. Well, you can say why that's not weird with this stuff. Or you can say, like O'Connor does, why not just think there is no event causation? So when you say the rock rolling down the hill is what caused the tree to fall over, right? Two events. O'Connor's say he has independent arguments in his book for why event causation is just a description. That what actually is going on is the powers of those objects, the rock, the ground, the tree. So event causation actually gets reduced to agent causation. Agent causation is actually the only kind of real fundamental causation. And we can explain things in terms of events, sure, but really at the bottom, it's all agent causation. That's another route that you could take. Okay. Now, agent causation, another objection, this is the third objection. Agent causation seems to require self-creation, which is impossible. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we have already seen this. This is Galen Strawson's basic argument. Okay, it's another objection to agent causation, right? Two assumptions start this objection. What we do is the result of how we are, and to be responsible for what we do, we must be responsible for how we are, right? What we do is the result of how we are, just our character, everything, our beliefs, desires, that causes what we do. And so in order to be responsible for what we do, we need to be responsible for what caused what we do, right? But that creates this regress. Well, then that how we are would be caused by something we did to make us that way, and then we'd have to be responsible for the way we were before that that resulted in us doing that thing that made us this way that caused that first action, and back and back and back and back. And the problem is one of two things. Either, right? Either we would have to be infinite, but we're not infinite, or we'd have to at some moment create ourselves to be a certain way. And that is incoherent. How can you create yourself if you don't exist yet? You'd have to already exist to create yourself. But if you create yourself, that means you didn't exist. That's why you needed to be created. It's just like a square circle. You can't create yourself. That doesn't make any sense. So either you have this regress, and so we'd have to be infinite, but we're not. And the only way out of the regress is to say at some moment you created yourself, but that's incoherent. So that's the Strawson objection. Okay. The response, which we haven't really seen, is one thing to say. The first thing O'Connor says is, you don't have to be responsible for how you are. So in order to be responsible for the actions you perform, Strawson says, well, it came from the way you are. So of course, in order to be responsible for Y, if Y came from X, the way you are, you got to be responsible for X if X caused Y, right? O'Connor tries to reject that and says you could be responsible for something that you do even if you're not responsible for the character from which that action flowed. Okay, so how is that possible? Well, he's like, look, just right here, my picture from earlier. This stuff, the reasons that you see for an action, which you see reasons for actions because of the way you are, right? Your capacities, your character, that's why you think this reason here is a reason for A. Someone else with a different character, a different history, they might not think that this is a reason to do A. Or they might think it is, but maybe to a way lesser degree than 80%, right? So actually the way in which you see reasons How reasons motivate you to act is a result of your character and your capacities and the way that you were formed, right? Your history, right? But none of that is determined. Sorry, the character and all that stuff, the reasons you have, your character, that doesn't determine what you'll do. Not on the agent causal picture, right? So why would you need to be responsible for the way you are if the way you are is not really determining what you do? You determine what you do. The agent here, with their power, kind of through their power. If it was just the power doing the work, then all the probabilities that we add up here would be able to tell us like what's likely to happen. Like if you roll it back 1,000 times, this will happen, 800 times, this will happen 200 times because of these probabilities. That's not the way this picture works. It's the agent who takes these probabilities, these inclinations, into account, but then ultimately they decide what to do. And they can kind of go against their motivations, right? So if that's true, then why would you need to be responsible for your character and the way that you're motivated? Because that's ultimately not what decides what you do. You do. The reasons you have, the motivations and all, they still do some work explaining, right? You do A because you were moved by reasons to do A. That's still true. But the reasons didn't guarantee that you would do A. And they didn't even guarantee that you would do A 80% of the time. They motivated you to a certain degree. And they explain why you do A, if you do A, if you actually end up doing A. But you just kind of find yourself motivated, right? You're just like, I feel like I see these reasons, and those reasons just motivate me in the ways that they do. And then I simply decide. I'm just sensing all this information. I'm realizing the ways in which I'm motivated, and then me, with my power, I decide what to do. And if that's true, it's not clear why we would need to be responsible for our character, right? If Frankenstein's monster wakes up just one day, comes alive, and has a bunch of motivations, if you're an agent causal theorist and you say, well, he has the agent causal power to act with or against those motivations, then you might think he could still be responsible. He doesn't need to be responsible for the way in which he's motivated. He doesn't need to be responsible for the character that Frankenstein gave him, as long as it's still up to him how he enacts that character. Okay. So the response is, from O'Connor, maybe you don't need to accept this assumption. To be responsible for what we do, we must be responsible for how we are. O'Connor tries to reject that. Well, what can Strawson or somebody say in reply? Like, yeah, but how you are determines the options that you get, right? A and B were options for you here because of the way you are, and that doesn't seem fair, right? If you just Frankenstein wakes up and he's like got this really terrible character that, or Frankenstein's monster wakes up, sorry, and he's got this really terrible character because Frankenstein gave it to him, right? Frankenstein's monster wasn't even alive, so how could he be responsible for his bad character? But he comes alive, he's got this bad character, and now he's got the choice of, let's say, killing Frankenstein or killing the helper, can't remember his name, or killing the village. Maybe those are the only three things that his character motivates him to do. Well, now he's going to be blameworthy no matter what he does, right? Maybe he still has the free agent power to pick which one of the bad things he does, but that doesn't seem very fair, right? How you are determines the kinds of options that you take to be reasonable, right? The options that seem viable to you are the result of the kind of character you have. And it's early conditions that form your character that determine which kinds of reasons will motivate you, right? If you have a really terrible upbringing, like think of Saddam Hussein's son, he's just not going to be motivated by moral reasons, right? Because, like, why would he? He was brought up in a terribly awful environment. So if your early conditions, before you have any real control, form your character, determine the kinds of reasons that move you, right? What you see as even a viable choice is the result of your character, which was formed before you, right? That doesn't seem like it's up to you. Maybe it's up to you what you pick amongst those options, but you didn't pick your options, right? So in response, O'Connor says, well, look, what you're saying here, what this reply says is, you didn't ever have any option to form your character. It always occurred before you had any control or anything like that. He's like, do we really think that that's true? Of course your character's influenced by your upbringing. Right? Of course, like there's things before you had any control. You're like a toddler or whatever. You don't have any real awareness of morality or control or anything like that. No free will. And so, of course, like the way you're brought up, the circumstances you're in, it's going to kind of affect the way your character might develop. But what this objection is saying more than that, it's saying there's never an opportunity. There was no opportunity ever to form your character. And he thinks we need really good evidence to think that's true. Because, look, control and responsibility kind of gradually starts to come in as you get older, right? Of course, your character's being influenced by things outside of your control, but eventually you get some deliberative capacities, maybe even when you're like 8 or 9 or 10, right? You can start thinking about things for yourself. And yeah, you've got a character that's already kind of been formed, but you can start to alter your character, change your character. You start getting these capacities little by little, right? Maybe you can't perform fully free, fully responsible actions when you're 8 or 9, but you can perform like kind of responsible actions, kind of controlled actions, and kind of shape your character. And then later down the road, you can kind of even more shape your character and exercise control. And so there might be at some point a way in which you can influence your character in a way that you were responsible for. Right? So the idea is, look, in order to be free, the agent causation view requires self-creation because you got to be responsible for the way you are. Why did you choose this? Well, because of the way you are. So you had to be responsible for that. And the first response is, why should we have to be responsible for this? It doesn't determine what we do. Our agent power does. Like, yeah, but the options that you get result from the way you are, your character. The reasons that move you is the result of your character, which you don't really have control over. Like, oh, the response is like, really? I didn't have control over that? I mean, come on. Control comes in a little bit at a time and responsibility, and so I can begin to start shaping my character little by little. It's not up here, but the response from the objector, someone who's trying to defend Strawson here, can say, well, your agent power is part of the way you are. Right? So when we go here, we say like, you choose one thing rather than the other. Why did you choose that? Why is your power exercising in the way that it does to choose A? Are you responsible for your power doing that? Seems like either you have to say no because the power is shaped by the reasons, which you're not responsible for, or if you say yes, you really do control how this goes. Even though these kind of influence it, you really control A or B. And then it just again seems kind of random. Why did you do A? Look, you could have done B for these reasons. If the way you are doesn't really have anything to do with that, doesn't determine it, then it seems random. It seems like there's no explanation. And here that gets us to this. Free will requires a contrastive explanation. It requires us to be able to explain why you did one thing rather than another. It doesn't just require explaining why you did A, because of course you had beliefs and desires that motivated you to do A. But you also had beliefs and desires that motivated you to do B. So why did you do A in the actual world when you, exactly the same circumstances, exactly the same history, you did B in another possible situation? Nothing about the past, nothing about you is different. And one time you did A, one time you did B. Seems like nothing explains why you did A rather than doing B. Something explains why you do A, and it's this stuff. You had reasons to do A. You were motivated to do A. And if you did B, you had reasons to do B. You were motivated to do B. So we can get this single line explanation from choosing A to doing A, or from being motivated to do A to choosing to do A, and from being motivated to do B to choosing to do B. But why did you do A rather than doing B? What's the contrast? What's the contrastive explanation? Same exact past can past is the same. Sorry, you have the same exact past, so that can't explain it. You have the same exact circumstances right here, so that can't explain it. With the agent being exactly the same, so the agent can't explain it. And that same past, same circumstances, same agent, exactly the same, it allows different possible futures. So what explains why you're in one rather than the other? Nothing. That's the objection. Nothing. Nothing explains it. Okay. And if nothing explains why you're in here rather than here, like in this possible world, then you don't have a contrastive explanation and you need one. And the response, as you might guess, is just deny that we need contrastive explanations. Say, all we need to do is explain why you did A, which we can do with your reasons and your motivations. You don't have to explain why you did A rather than doing B, which you could have done. Okay. We can still explain E, right? Or A, sorry. We can still explain why you did A. You know, that's just this. Why'd you do A? Well, look, here. Your character, your capacities, and then all these reasons you had to do A. That made it really rational. That rationally explains A. Even this rationally explains B, because you are motivated to do B. You don't always do what you have the strongest motivations to do. But why one rather than the other? And O'Connor says, why should we think that we need this extra contrastive explanation? So he just denies that we need contrastive explanation. Now, it's not here, but you might think about, can we really get rid of this explanation? If we just explained why you did A in terms of your reasons to do A, it's really unclear that that explains everything, because is that really an explanation for why you did A? You had all those reasons and motivations here in this other possibility, but you didn't do A. So how could it explain why you did A? It's just like going backwards. Now it's putting the time here and saying, oh, why are you here? Oh, well, the cause happened and I was here and then it caused me to do A. That's not very interesting. We want to know why you're here instead of being here, because you could have been here. If this is a good action and this is a bad action, why are you praiseworthy? You could have done something bad. Why didn't you? And vice versa, right? Why are you blameworthy for A if A is bad and B is good? And some people say, oh, well, because you could have done B. All right, well, why didn't you? You had all the motivations to do B, right? So the point is, some people are not going to be satisfied with denying the contrastive explanation, because the contrastive explanation is what gives us a really substantive, nice explanation for why you did the thing you did instead of doing something you could have done. And we need more than just all the beliefs and desires that you had, because those are the same in both. The point here is, if you perform a free action, we really want a good explanation for it. And the question is, do you need a contrastive explanation in order to have a really good explanation for why you did what you did? An explanation that's enough to say that you did it freely and it wasn't just lucky, right? Remember the problem here, if you don't have a contrastive explanation, it seems like a matter of luck that you ended up in the world where you did A instead of the world where you did B, because everything's exactly the same here. Okay, that leads us again to luck. So these next three objections are about the agent causal view being insufficient for free will. Okay, so it starts. I'll try to move these more quickly. I know we're getting kind of over time here, but again, last week was kind of fixing things and kind of push back a little bit. So this won't be normal, but I do want to just push through this so you can have it all. All right. So undetermined actions are lucky. That's the objection. If actions are not determined, that means they're lucky. Okay. And having agent causation instead of event causation, it doesn't fix this. Right. So agent causation is indeterministic, meaning there have to be multiple possibilities. Because agent causationists are incompatibilist. Determinism cannot be true. So agent causation has to be undetermined, indeterministic. Those are synonyms, okay? And indeterminism implies chance. If you roll back the universe, try to keep that in there. If you roll back the universe 1,000,000,000 times with the same exact past, the same exact moment here before you choose, and let's say you choose B, okay? Then you roll it back again to here. Now you choose A. Then you roll back again to here, exactly the same. And then you choose B. And you keep rolling it back, millions and millions of times. This is the thing. It can always be different. From here to here, I mean. If you roll it from here, say you choose B, and you roll it back up to here, it can always be different. Go A to B. That's what indeterminism is. Even if supposedly you only do this like 20% of the time, you're like really minimally motivated to do this. If you roll back the universe an infinite number of times, then the probabilities don't matter. It can always be anything. You could do A or B. Okay. Any outcome, right, is possible. Even if there's only 1%, 0.0001% chance you do this. It's possible that if you did A and we roll the universe back, then you do B. Okay. That's the problem. Agent causation is indeterministic. And so we could roll back the universe 1,000,000,000, billion, infinite times, and any outcome is possible, even if you're exactly the same right here at the moment of choice, every time we roll it back. That seems like luck. Okay, so the agent causation person responds by saying, look, basically, the explanation for why I did A in this world and B in the other possibility when we rolled it back is my power. It's my agent causal power. And it's primitive. I can't really explain how it works, but that's what's missing from the event causal picture. Okay. If it's just events that cause other events, so me having mental states, beliefs, desires here, that event of me deliberating causes this other event. If it's just events, then yeah, it's going to be lucky. The agent causal libertarian thinks that the event causal libertarian suffers from the luck problem. But they think that they solve the luck problem. How? By introducing an agent causal power. Right? So if it's just events here, if this is just one event, me deliberating, and another event, me choosing A, then it's all about the probabilities. And you're right. It wouldn't be anything but luck why you were here rather than here. Because we could just roll it back 1,000,000,000 times and always something, the other choice is possible. But, O'Connor says, this is missing the point. This is missing the fact that agent causation is in there. This primitive control that we have. That's what we're giving you. That's what we're adding to the event causal libertarian's picture. We're adding a primitive kind of control. The agent power is independent of events. Antecedent, the previous causal states, beliefs, capacities, circumstances, all your desires, that stuff doesn't determine what you'll do. It doesn't even probabilistically set what you'll do. It probabilistically inclines you and motivates you in probabilistic ways. You're like more motivated to do one thing rather than the other to some degree. But that doesn't set what will happen. This sets what will happen. Your agent power. Okay. And in the world where you do A, this up here, in the world where you do A, if that's what happens, it's your power sort of uniquely firing to A. There's this unique kind of exercising of your power towards A. And here it's this unique exercising of your power towards B. The choice, towards the choice to do B. Without that power, it's just you deliberate in the state that you're in, and then the next thing that happens is you choose A. You deliberate in the exact same state that you're in, and the next thing is you choose B. Okay, kind of random. So the agent causal person puts in between the choice for B and the deliberation this exercising of this power, this unique power that manifests towards B, and this unique power that manifests towards A. Same power, but the exercising of it, the firing of the power is the difference. Okay. And O'Connor's like, you can call that mysterious if you want, but I need a better argument than that. I need a better argument than that sounds mysterious. That's not a good enough objection. That's kind of what he says. Okay. And the question here is this enough? Is this primitive, unexplainable control that you have to exercise your power towards choosing A versus exercising your power towards choosing B, is that really enough? Does that really give the explanation? Okay. Can you, if you don't like that, can you add to the claim that it's mysterious? If you do like this, is there anything that the objector can say in response to this, and maybe how can you reply to that? Okay. And this is kind of the same thing. So this objection is very, very similar. It's basically just saying, look, you take this rollback argument, roll it back, right? And that means it's kind of lucky. Well, then here O'Connor was like, no, it's not lucky, because it's not just events here. You have an agent power that kind of uniquely and unexplainably fires towards choosing A. And here, the agent uniquely and kind of unexplainably fires their power towards choosing B. And that's why it's not lucky. But then what Mealy did was he took the same objection, the rollback argument, and was like, oh, okay, well, I see what you mean. You add some agent power here. But now, why don't we just ask this question again? Does the agent power contrastively explain why you do A rather than B? Why did your power fire towards choosing A rather than fire towards choosing B? Because you are exactly the same here. This should sound repetitive. It's the same exact response. Only now, instead of talking about the agent and the circumstances, we're talking about the power. Same exact agent, same exact power, but here their power fired towards B, and here their power fired towards A. Still seems random. That's this objection. Okay. Still seems lucky, random. If the rollback argument works, as we just showed, then it's lucky. But as we just saw, if the response is like, no, look, we can non-contrastively explain the action, right? We could say, well, we explain the action by saying, look, you were motivated to do A here. You were motivated to do B here. That's why you did B. When you did B, you had reasons to do A. That's why you did A. And that's non-contrastive. Okay. But if we do that, if we just explain it with non-contrastive stuff, like the reasons for doing A is why you did A, and the reasons for doing B is why you did B in the other possible scenario. If that's true, well, then we don't need agent causation. The event causal person can say that. You don't need a special causal power to say, here, let me go to this one. Why do you do A if you do A? If the agent causal person ends up saying, well, because look, the reason you did A was because you were motivated to do A and your character was such that it allowed you to do A. The rollback argument says, well, if we rolled this back, you could have had all the same stuff and then you did B. I'm like, well, yeah. But we don't need contrastive explanations, the agent causal person says. We don't need contrastive explanations. We just need to explain why you did B when you do B. And when you do B, it's explained by all your reasons to do B. When you do A, it's explained by all your reasons to do A. Right? Well, the objection now is, okay, well, if that's the explanation, if we can non-contrastively explain the action, then why do we even need the agent causal power? The event causal person can say that. And to be honest with you, the compatibilist can say that, which is even worse. It's not just the event causal libertarian can say that, can give non-contrastive explanations. So can the compatibilist. The compatibilist can just say, oh, well, the state that you were in before you acted, with all the reasons and motivations that you had, that's what explains why you acted the way you do, even though it's determined. They can still give non-contrastive explanations for actions, right? They can say, why did you do that? Why did you do A rather than something else? And like, oh, well, because you were determined by your mental states, by your beliefs and your desires and your circumstances, determined that you would do A. That's a non-contrastive explanation. It might even be a contrastive explanation. And so the objection here is, if you combine this rollback argument here, if you roll back over and over and over and over, there's always the other outcome is always possible, and so therefore it seems like chance. Why are you in the A world instead of the B world? Well, it's just chance, because if we roll it back and back and back, you could be in one, you could be in the other. But combine that with the no contrastive explanation. Now say also, it's not just lucky, and you can't just add a power in there, because the power still does not give contrastive explanations. Why did your power do this rather than this? We still don't have anything that explains why you did one thing rather than the other, because even when you add the power, it's possible for you to do both. And it just seems lucky that your power does one rather than the other. And O'Connor just says, again, he's kind of just like, well, you're sort of missing the point. Again, I have agent power. It's this primitive power to settle. You're telling me that my power doesn't explain anything, but I'm telling you my power does explain. It's this primitive control. I can't really tell you much more, but it's this, just like the radioactive decay, is like this primitive, unexplainable reason why the radioactive particles started decaying, because of this sort of power that's completely undetermined, not even by probabilities, right? Same thing is here exists with the person, and it's that power to settle. Why did I do A rather than B? Because I settled on A. And there's just nothing more to it than that. Why did I do B rather than A here? Because in that world, the difference was I exercised my power in a different way to settle on B. And that is the claim. And these people like Mealy and other people who are worried about this, O'Connor's trying to tell them, you're just kind of, I don't know how you guys might like this, but he's basically saying, you're asking too many questions. Why did your power settle on A? It could have settled on B. And O'Connor's like, yeah, that's it. That's the end of the story. It could have settled on B. You're right, because I'm an incompatibilist and I want other possibilities. So yeah, I require open future, and it's true to say that I could have settled on B, but that doesn't mean it's lucky. I've just tried to explain to you this power that we have that causes basic mental actions, and there's more to the story, obviously, in these books that these agent causal power theorists write, try to squaring this with science and all that. But the point for us is just there's a kind of dialectical stalemate here, where the objector says, I want more. I want more explanation for why you did A rather than B. And the agent causal person is just saying, like, there just isn't anymore. You have this primitive power, and you just exercise it with the way that you are. And O'Connor tries to do all this stuff and say, look, well, let me try to tell you how your power gets influenced by reasons and character and all that. But ultimately, you just decide what to do. That just is the power. The power just is the power to settle. And event causal people don't have that power. And that's why the luck argument applies to them, because they don't have that power. It's just about events knocking around next to each other, right? O'Connor's like, I've given you a power, and I've tried to explain how it works, and you just keep wanting more. But he thinks that the objectors are unjustified in wanting more. It's like, I don't see why you need any more. I've explained it to you. primitive power to settle. Okay, so last objection. This is the one, again, we saw this before. This is from the Skeptic Week, where we read Dirk Perboom's argument, the dovetail argument. Right? So he thinks agent causation is not incoherent. It's not like a logically impossible power. He's like, okay, it's logically possible that we have this, but it doesn't seem like it's consistent with what we see in the world. It doesn't seem consistent with the laws of nature. So the problem is the agent causal power can't be governed by probabilities, right? And by governed, we mean like caused. So O'Connor is saying O'Connor's not saying it's governed here. He's saying it's structured by probabilities, but it's not governed because the power doesn't sort of exercise on its own based on probabilities. The agent exercises the power independently of the probabilities. Okay, and so, where'd it go? Sorry. Perboom says agent causal power cannot be governed by probabilities. O'Connor agrees. Perboom's just saying, like, look, you're saying in order to avoid the luck objection, the power itself cannot be dictated by the probabilities, right? Okay, so, whoops. And so because of that, because the power cannot be governed by probabilities, either it doesn't exist because that's not going to make sense, or we don't need it because events can explain everything. Okay, so if the agent causal power, if it's not governed by probabilities of events, then it seems like it could break the laws. Right? Because remember, the laws, physical laws of the universe, like how different chemical substances interact with each other and how the elements of physics, like quarks and atoms and so on, interact with each other, the laws that explain how things behave in the universe are about events. They're about certain kinds of processes, events, and remember where an object just having a property, like me having a belief, that's an event. Okay, it's an event or a state. That's what laws are about. The probability of certain states and events causing certain other states and events. But if agent causation, if my power is not governed by probabilities, it seems like it's not governed by the laws of nature. And so even if all the probabilities based on the laws of nature and how my capacities and my circumstances and all the reasons that I see, if that makes a certain set of things possible, the agent causation theorist is saying that doesn't tell us what will happen. The agent can do any of these things, even the least probable thing he could do every time. And so if that's true, we should see the agents. I mean, we should see agents with agent causal powers acting in ways that are not really predictable by the laws of nature. But we don't see this. Right? That's not what we see. People tend to act in accordance with the laws of nature. And so either it doesn't exist, or, right, so there's no, empirically we don't see that. And so there's not really a need to believe in agent causal power. All the events and the probabilities, like the events of my brain and having certain beliefs and where my neurons are, kind of probabilistically determines the other types of events that my brain will undergo, like what I'll believe next and what I'll decide next. We can just explain all that with events. We don't need agent causal power. And if you want to say, no, there is an agent causal power, it's just that people exercise their agent causal power in accordance with what the laws of nature predict. Well, Perboom says, okay, you could say that, but that would be a really wild coincidence that everyone is just choosing freely with their agent power what the laws of nature will predict. It's just like, why do we even need this thing? It's just why don't we just talk about events and probabilities? Okay. So we don't, empirically, it seems like there's no reason to believe in agent causal power. And if that's true, we're back to events and we're back to luck. That's the objection. So it's not consistent with the laws of nature, meaning now we're just back to events. We don't need the agent causal power. We're back to events. governing ordinary events, right? And that's back to luck, because event causation gets us here. All the events, including the event of me deliberating and all that, makes a couple different things likely to certain probabilities, but now there's going to be no explanation why we end up in one rather than the other. So if agent causation doesn't fit with the laws of nature, we're back to events, so we're back to luck. And O'Connor tries to respond by saying Paraboom is confused about agent causation and about the problem of luck. It's not the mere existence of probabilities that brings in luck. So again, he's like, well, if we don't need it, if we don't need the agent power, right, it's just back to events and probabilities. Now we're back to luck. Like, no. The problem of luck was not merely probabilities. It was the absence of a way for the agent to determine which probability is actual. Okay? The problem here is not that there's an open future with different probabilities. The problem here is that there's no way for the agent to determine which probability becomes actual. That is the problem of luck. And if that's the problem of luck, then adding the agent causal power fixes that, because now we have a way for the agent to determine what happens. Okay. And an agent causal power determining which happens, that is not inconsistent with the laws of nature. Nothing about that is inconsistent. Paraboom wants to say, well, it'd be really wild for it to dovetail with what the laws predict, but there more needs to be said here, is what O'Connor's going to say. It's like, it's not logically inconsistent. You can have an agent causal power that is structured by all the things in the world, reasons, character traits, circumstances, capacities, structures your agent power and makes certain probabilities here. And then the agent just picks which one is true. Right? Sorry. The agent just picks, kind of decides which probable action will come to be real. And so you still get just all the physical laws of nature explaining all this stuff here. It's just the agent decides which one will happen. Okay, so that is the end. Again, I'm sorry this is a little longer than normal, but we did get backed up last week, so that's just going to be the explanation. We got to make do. So, all right. So review again. Please make sure you understand what libertarianism is. It's not the same as incompatibilism. It is a kind of incompatibilism. Okay. Make sure you understand roughly what the difference is between event and agent causation. Okay. Libertarians who think that agents cause things, and that's different from events, like agents believing things. Okay. Make sure you understand the difference between those. What motivates philosophers to be agent causations in particular? Does it add anything above event causation? These are all questions to kind of make you think about and decide what you think about, like who wins in these different little debates here about these different topics. Does agent causation really add anything over and above what event causation or even compatibilism, right, can offer? Can you explain what it means for the agent causation theorist to have metaphysical commitments? Remember, O'Connor says you have to be an endurantist, you have to think about emergent powers, so the agent is more than just its parts, and then powerful causation, powerful properties of objects. Okay. This is a little less important than the other things, but it would be very helpful to understand what was going on in this section. So try to make sense of that, but don't focus as much on that, I guess, if you need to split your time up. Ask yourself whether you can explain O'Connor's view. The stuff highlighted in green. Where are we at? Sorry. I think there's one more. Yeah. This stuff, his answer, okay, what is agent causation and how's it different? Here's his answer to that. This is a different answer he considers. He doesn't really like that. He likes this one. What do agents cause with their power? Here's some possibilities, but here's his answer. Okay. What's the role of reasons? This is Clark's story about reasons that ended up with this problem because reasons don't actually affect what we do. And O'Connor thinks this is the right story. The agent's power is structured by reasons and other things that produce certain motivations, inclinations, probabilities, you might think. But the probabilities are not alone. It's the agent exercising his power, picking which probability comes real. It's the power, agent causal power is the power for an agent to realize certain probable actions, to make them real. And the probabilities kind of correspond to these felt motivations that might influence the agent. That's his picture. Could you explain that? And I strongly recommend that you try to just explain that to a friend or family member, whatever. That's the way you're going to digest this stuff the best. Okay. Dispositional view, right? There's primitive powers, agents cause mental acts, and then reasons have the role of structuring your power, but not determining which option will come about. Okay. And then try to understand one of the objections, because that's what your paper is going to need to be about if you write on this. Okay. The two objections are different. The two sets of objections are different. The first four, they're like, oh, this view is incoherent. It's like saying round squares exist. The other three say that the agent power, the idea of an agent power is not incoherent. I guess it's possible, but it's not enough to get free will because there's other problems, right? So the incoherent ones are like agents aren't in time, but supposedly they cause events that are in time, and that seems really incoherent. Causation is supposed to be uniform, but agent causation implies two types, event and agent causation, and that's incoherent. Agent causation implies an infinite regress or self-creation, and that's incoherent. That's the Strawson's basic argument. Free will logically implies a contrastive explanation. So the concept of free will, for an action to be free, we need a contrastive explanation. Sorry. But agent causation can't give that. So it's incoherent. Okay. And then agent causation is insufficient for free will. The idea here is indeterminism entails luck, and agent causation, even if it's possible, it wouldn't fix luck. It doesn't solve that. It still ends up being lucky. Agent causation doesn't add anything. So an event causal theory can use non-contrastive explanations. They can explain why someone does something, even if they could have done something else, but it's not a contrastive explanation. It's just saying like, oh, I had reasons and motivations to do this, and that's what caused me to do it. But an event causal theory can say that. And so why do we even need agent causation? Right? And then Pereboom's argument, agent causation seems, when we look in the world empirically, it seems like agent causation doesn't exist. It seems like it would be able to divert from the probabilistic laws of nature, but it doesn't do that. And saying that it dovetails with what the laws predict is just too coincidental. Okay. And then focus on this stuff too. I mean, this is just the structure. What's O'Connor doing when he's replying to these worries? Right? Someone says, here's a problem, and like, what's the strategy for replying? Think about that. And then these are questions for your evaluation if you choose to write on this paper. All right. And that will be it. Thanks.